Welcome to the Black Writers Studio, a podcast presented by the Hurston Wright Foundation and hosted by Dr. Khadijah Ali Coleman. The Black Writers Studio is dedicated to showcasing Black writers who are transforming the world today with their literary pen and creating a legacy for the culture. Kiki Petrosino is the author of multiple books, including White Blood, A Lyric of Virginia, and her memoir, Bright, which was released in 2022. She holds graduate degrees from the University of Chicago and the University of Iowa Writers Workshop. She directs the creative writing program at the University of Virginia, where she is a professor of poetry. Kiki Petrosino is the recipient of a MacDowell Artist Residency, a Pushcart Prize, a Fellowship in Creative Writing from the National Endowment for the Arts, and other prestigious honors. All right, Kiki, it is so great to see you again. I think the last time we saw each other was this past August, when you were one of our instructors, our beloved instructors for our Writers Week at Howard University. Just based on the feedback that we got from the participants in your poetry workshop, you definitely make an impact with your presence as a teacher. And I know just from our engagement before the Writers Week took place that you have such a dedicated passion and commitment to teaching poetry students. So I actually want to start with you as a poetry student. How did Kiki become this person known as a poet who now is moving into other genres, particularly this new book that you have that I'm going to get to, but I really wanted to learn about the early story of Kiki the poet.
Oh, wow. Well, thanks so much. Thanks so much, Khadijah. It's really nice to be with you. And it was so wonderful to teach this summer at Howard University through the Hurston Wright Foundation's summer workshop. And It was just a fabulous experience. I encourage anyone listening to take part in those workshops and to really enjoy everything that Hurston Wright has to offer for the community.
Appreciate that.
I became a poet through a love and appreciation of music. My mom, so I should start out by saying that I am a Black American of interracial ancestry.
Mm-hmm.
My mother is Black. My father is Italian American. And growing up in the house with my mom, a Hampton University graduate, there was always music in the house. She plays multiple musical instruments, piano, flute.
Oh, wow.
She sings. And so in the house, she was always playing records. She was always playing the radio. I grew up in the 80s and 90s. So it was a lot of top 40, pop music. Mm-hmm. And so what she would always do is my mom would always want to engage us with the music on a deep level. So we would listen to a song, and then as part of enjoying it, she would talk to my sister and I about what the song meant. She would ask us questions. Who do you think is singing this song? What is this song about? How does this song make you feel? Why do you like listening to this song? And we started not only listening to the actual music, but in that way, she was inviting us to think a little bit analytically about what was going on in that piece of music and that piece of art. And so I took with me through my whole life an appreciation of sound and an appreciation of story as articulated through sound.
Yes.
And that really is what a poem is. A poem exists on the air. It exists in time. A poem exists on the breath and in the ear of the listener and of the reader. And so I try to bring some musical sensibility into all of my writing. But I really just always give honor and credit to my mom for being that influence early on.
That's wonderful. How early would you say you started crafting what you would call poems and began sharing them with other people?
I think that happened early in my high school career. I
Mm.
was born in Baltimore and went to high school at a Catholic school called Mercy High School in Baltimore. There was an amazing, English teacher, as so many of us have stories about how we came to our vocations. A lot of times it's teachers who encouraged us. And so it was
Yes.
my ninth grade English teacher, Miss Gibson, who not only taught a wonderful English class for us, but she also led a writing workshop during study hall.
Oh,
So
wow.
she invited me and a selection of other students to share poetry and to sort of get to know one another as fellow artists in that context. And that is when I started thinking about what a poem is and trying out my own way of
Hmm.
of being inside language in the way that poetry asks us to do.
Do you feel that you have a voice, a distinct voice that is vastly different from that voice starting out, um, or has it evolved over the years? And if so, in what ways has it evolved or changed? How have you gotten to know this voice that's yours?
I think that at the core, the speaker of my poems is consistent.
Okay.
That young speaker that I developed was curious, observant, exploratory self.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of my poems have to do with self-definition, self-exploration,
Mm-hmm.
issues of identity, the disconnect that we encounter oftentimes as people of color between our internal sense of self
Mm-hmm.
and the way that the outside world wants to define us
Mm-hmm.
for the purposes of categorizing us, maybe for the purposes of marginalizing us from the
Mm.
center of the conversation. So, in terms of the basic questions that my voice was asking at the beginning of my career, I think that I'm encountering those same, like, always exploring those same questions in my current work. But
Mm-hmm.
I think that intellectually and artistically, I'm able to handle certain questions with the tools of poetry in a more expert way.
Right. The
Um, you
craft,
know,
because you've grown with the
yeah,
craft.
it's
Yeah.
that craft piece, but it's also like there were certain things about my own life and upbringing. Yeah, as we'll talk about the memoir in a minute, but in the memoir, I talk about some painful things that happened in my
Mm-hmm.
family, and I really was not able as a young person, as a younger poet, to put into poetry some of those questions and to tell some of those stories. And I think that I really needed to live every day of the past 20
Mm.
years since some of those things happened in order to be able to craft a poem around those
Mm.
issues.
I hear you. The reason why I asked that question is because as I was reading Bright, your memoir, which is a collection of essays, which I told you earlier off air that they are very poetic in how they're presented. I very easily heard the voice of young Kiki and felt the pain. I felt all of the different emotions that were being shared. And I actually was taken aback by how easily you were able to present that self, knowing that you're a fully grown woman, right? But how you were able to connect with that voice so easily was very jarring, and because it was so expertly done. But I did want to, there was um, a line that for me was the most resonating in the piece, and kind of is one of my takeaways with what you're addressing in the memoir, where you say, I've never wanted to kill myself, but there have been times in my life when I've wanted to be with the dead. And so I had to put the book down and walk away and just sit, because um, that just really, I don't even think I think of the word chilling, but that's not necessarily what I felt. Definitely goosebumps, very searing. But it really encapsulates what you're doing in this book, which is what you said earlier, exploring these identities, but even going deeper than the exploration of identity and exploring, really taking to task these ghosts that have that penetrate our history, our bloodlines, and that have not really been held accountable for the things that the carnage that they've left in their wake. And and you address that so definitely, I think. And so I wanted to talk about this new book that you had that come out this year, and um, how you moved from the type of work that you've done previously to move into this direction with Bright, which is titled a memoir.
Yeah. So it's such a wonderful setup. And I'm always glad to know that the work resonates deeply with readers because, of course, I write in the first place, I write so that I can get my own expression out. And so I am my own first reader. And so it's always an adventure and a mystery in the sort of cosmic sense to know what will impact the reader, how the reader will relate. And, as poets and as writers, we kind of occupy by necessity kind of an outsider view. We have to be observant of what's going on around us so that we can write about it. We also need to in some way be observational of our own emotions so that we can write about them. And then we have to kind of come back into ourselves and into our writing when it's shared with other people and kind of think about and listen to what the reader has to say. And so I was really glad to hear that you pulled out that line, because I feel like that line about I have never wanted to kill myself. I've never wanted to end my own life. But there have been these times in my life when I have wanted to be with the dead. Like I have sought communion with loved ones that I've known that have departed and gone to the next dimension, or potentially ancestors, people from the past who I never met personally, but whose legacies whose legacies continue to resonate into the present. So Bright is a memoir. It's a memoir of mine, but it also, I think, speaks to a collectivity of Black experience. So, I mean, Bright itself is an American slang term. Used by both Black and white communities historically to describe people who are very light complected, very light skinned people of seemingly Black and white ancestry. So there's lots of different terms, there's different ways to describe people in terms of their complexion and skin tone in the United States. But bright is one way of talking about a very light complected person of color who either has interracial parentage or who the viewer suspects has that parentage. So even going back into antebellum, like legal records, you can see that, like, in courthouses, there are records of free people of color being described as bright mulattoes or as dark mulattoes. And that referred to their skin color as it looked to somebody who was viewing them. So as a person who has this body, who is encountering the world in this particular body that I have, there's this tension, I think, between two kinds of stories. There's the story of a haunting, and then there's the story of like evidence or seeing evidence. When you look at me, I have a light complexion, my eye color is green, but my hair is like very curly and coiled. And it's evident that I am a mixed person, right? In an American context. And so the story of evidence that somebody looking at me could tell is, oh, I know exactly who you are. I know exactly how you came to be.
Mm,
I know that you must have mixed parentage. Now I think I know something about your parents.
mm-hmm,
When I hear you speak, I think I know something about where you grew up. I think I know something about who you associate with,
mm-hmm,
right?
mm-hmm,
All of which are like a series of suppositions, you know?
mm-hmm,
It's not actually telling you really what my story is,
mm-hmm,
or the truth about how I want to be, how I wish to be seen, or how I
mm-hmm,
might wish to speak to myself for myself.
mm-hmm,
The reason why it's also a story of a haunting is because we carry in our skin and in our DNA the histories and the lives of those who came before us.
mm-hmm,
And my parents were married in the mid 1970s. I was born in 79. Within a decade of Loving versus Virginia, which is the Supreme Court case that ended all the bans on interracial marriage in the United States. So my parents were legally married in a new era, in the 20th century. But I know that ancestors of mine may have come to their light complexions through violence, assault,
mm-hmm.
oppression, things that weren't about marriage and were about a consensual relationship. So
That
I
is
think
actually the history of my family. Yeah.
oh wow,
Mm-hmm,
yeah. So
mm-hmm,
so we carry with us as Black Americans memory,
mm-hmm,
but not memory of things that we personally experienced, but memory of ancestral experience, which is then made manifest in our bodies.
mm-hmm,
And so we carry with us the gift of
mm-hmm,
that ancestral legacy and the preservation of life, but
mm-hmm,
we also carry with us some of the ancestral pain, maybe that
mm-hmm.
that brought some of those stories into reality. And
Exactly.
so for a person like me and maybe like you, there's a lot to contend with when
Mm,
we think about the body. And
yeah.
when we look at ourselves in the mirror, there's many stories that we could potentially see.
Yeah.
And then there's our own experience,
Right.
like in my personal sense of myself, I don't think of myself as a divided human being. I
Mm-hmm.
don't think of myself as having a black half, a white half, or only identifying with one aspect of human experience. I
Mm-hmm.
feel that I'm a unified whole human being with integrity and dignity and with a desire to tell my own story.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So the memoir is kind of talking about my own life as a
Mm-hmm.
person with this body, but also going back a little bit in time and thinking about the region of the American South where my family comes from in Virginia, and talking about that complicated history that we don't always like to talk about in terms of its complexities.
Right. Exactly. Tell me, how long did it take for you to write this book? Being that it's personal, it's a memoir, um, you are very invested in it not being superficial. It's by no means a surface approach to you examining your history. It's very nuanced and deep. How long did it take for you to conceptualize what you wanted to do and for it to then find its way on paper?
In some ways, I feel like it took my whole life
Oh wow. Okay.
to reach the place where I could write with rigor
Mhm.
and with the depth that I wanted about my own journey. Um, Before this book, I was mainly a poet who would write the occasional essay.
Mhm.
So over the past several years, I'd written a few short pieces or a few serialized pieces of prose that
Mhm.
had been published here and there. But I was reading a lot. I've been reading a lot of nonfiction lately, and
Mm.
several important memoirs have come out in the past few years. I'm thinking about Natasha Trethewey's memoir, um, Memorial Drive, which is such
Mm.
a profound and beautiful elegy for her mother, and also it contains within it Natasha Trethewey's own story of how she came to be who she is.
Mhm.
So I have admired work like that and often aspired to maybe put something together
Mhm.
that would be a memoir. And however, and when I sort of proposed to my publisher that I write this book, I had thought that it would be a bit more of a scholarly, that it would have more of a scholarly or research component. I thought that I would
Mhm.
go to archives and do genealogical research and do historical research. But then the pandemic happened and
Mm.
all the archives that I wanted to visit closed. And then
Mm.
I stayed really close to home for a year and a half to two
Mm.
years. And so I found myself kind of adrift in terms of like my access to certain materials. So
Mm.
then I just kind of went inward with my thinking and I thought to myself, like, um, what are the actual texts that I think about most often or that have been important to my life and my literacy education. And I knew that, people like writers like Dante, Shakespeare were important touchstones for me. And so I just started to begin writing in a series of short pieces. And I realized too that the pandemic changed my ability to pay attention as a writer.
Hmm.
And I realized that I could really only do a few paragraphs at a time, or maybe one section of the book might only be one sentence because
Mm.
that's as much as I could concentrate on and focus on. So I started thinking about how I could concentrate my energy into fewer words, which of course
Mm.
is what poets do. But
Right.
I was also, writing the memoir that a poet would write. And so
Oh,
that's kind of how this um the collage or the braid
yeah.
of the different pieces in Bright came to be.
Is that even how, because I think what stands out for me is also how the words are laid on the page. And like, so there may be like the excerpt that I read is a line that's on the page by itself. You
Yep.
know what I mean? And um, that really, um, I think it taught me how to take things in, to let things breathe. So if that is how you went about writing it, did that also influence how you chose to lay the words on the page, how it would be received by the reader visually?
For sure. I really want, and this could also be true of my poetry now, is I would really like to see what happens when there is more space on the page
Yes.
for ideas and lines and language to breathe.
Yeah.
When you pick up Bright, it's in a bound. It's obviously a bound book, but it's a square shape.
Yes. I love
Um,
that.
that's something that I asked the publisher to consider doing for me because um, I felt like the book needed to have a certain squareness in the world,
Mm.
and that the reader would be able to encounter the language through kind of a portal, rather
Mm.
than through a standard sort of a standard length and width book.
Okay.
Um, Over time, I've started to see the page as a page that has a lot of depth and dimension to it. It's
Mm-hmm.
not just a flat picture plane that you would paint on, or a
Mm-hmm.
plane where you just are arranging the words or sliding the words onto the page.
Mm-hmm.
The page actually has depth, and so there are things that exist within the page, inside of it,
Mm-hmm.
that can be pulled out or that can be submerged into the page. You
Mm-hmm.
know, and so language for me is always there, sound is always there.
Mm-hmm.
But especially when you're talking about Black history, and the histories of some of these of our families, um, we don't always have a complete written record of our family story and our ancestral journey. And those stories had to have existed in the world because things happened and now we're here.
Mm-hmm.
But it's just that we don't have the story to be able to retell it. So if
Mm-hmm.
you think about the page as a multi-dimensional space, a fully
Mm-hmm.
dimensional space, it allows that room for the ancestral story to still be there and have a place to exist.
Mm.
Um, but it might not be able to surface at this time.
Right.
But there may be a moment
Right.
when it will come out.
Right.
Yeah.
You are teaching me so much. I'm just mesmerized by your process. And to know that these things were intentional makes them all the more meaningful. And I have to say that it definitely has been inspiring to me as a writer for to consider certain things that I never even considered in terms of, having a phrase on a page and advocating for that. That's how I want my book to show up. But
Yeah.
also, like when you even talk about, the shape of your book
Mhm.
and the size, I think of it being something that's small enough to take with you and to carry with you. It just makes it more accessible. Because even when we talk about a memoir, we usually think of, a thick and
Mhm.
bulky kind of book, but it's really presented in the way of, some of the classic, like what Ayanna Van Zant's Acts of Faith, like those small things
Yeah.
that we go back to revisit.
Mhm.
And I actually think of this book as something like that because, and I told you I had to sit and pause, and that's actually how I went through it. It wasn't just in one sitting where I just read through. It was moments.
Mhm.
I want to think about this. I'm going to walk away, think about it, and then I'm going to come back to it. And so it's just really brilliantly done, Kiki. And I just really enjoyed it. I was wondering if there was a piece from the book that you wanted to share during our time together.
Let me read the first page,
Okay.
first couple pages. The mirror. You don't need white people's approval to be happy, the mirror said. But if you want anything from their world, they have to like you. Bright is an American slang term for light skinned people of Black and white ancestry. It's not a compliment. From an early age, I understood how bright applies to me, to my skin, to the face I show the world. I am fair for a Black girl, powdery pale, especially in winter. It's hard to love bright. The sly, knowing way its lone syllable sidles up. Bright gets too close too soon, thinking it knows all about me. To be frank, there's a mean smile in the word. Light, bright, and damn near white goes the rhyme. F those light brights goes another. As soon as I enter the classroom, as soon as I put my books on the lectern, as soon as I begin speaking, those who don't like bright don't like me, and I can feel it. So what? The promise. Yes, with all her heart, she must and would break open. And as for peril, she wouldn't be at all afraid.
Thank you, Kiki.
Thank you, Khadijah.
I made it through without crying. Because I did cry when I read your book.
Oh,
It was very personal to me. So,
yeah. Do you know a lot about your family's story you were talking about before?
so actually, right before the pandemic, I had curated and put together an exhibit on my family history and the history of four other families. It was on migrating to Maryland,
Mhm.
DC families migrating to the Maryland suburbs.
Mhm.
And in doing so, I actually looked at my own family's history from Louisiana to DC to here. And so I'm aware of my mother's maternal side to an extent, but my mother was born while her birth mother was institutionalized, and she was conceived and born, so she doesn't know
Yeah.
that paternal side. But we assume that it's a white person because of how we all
Yeah.
came out looking. So yeah, so
Yeah.
and it's really someone becoming impregnated while institutionalized.
Mhm. Right.
So
Right. So
yeah,
it's like there's some story there. It's
that no one
you
talks about.
so you want in my writing, what I wanted to do was create a space for that memory to actually live and be without me touching it with
Mm,
my own words. And so that's why there's so much white space in the well, we call white space, but we really mean
yes,
unwritten upon paper, right?
right.
In the book is like for that story can exist in some dimension that
Mm,
is real. It is real. It happened, even
yes.
though language cannot touch it. What language can do is show you the space where the story is,
Wow.
you know, and that preserves, I think like in writing as a black writer, what I want to do is like always argue and advocate for the dignity, the integrity, the agency, and just bring respect to that to blackness and bring respect
Mhm,
to black memory, you
mhm.
know?
That's so beautiful. I I hope that one day you come back to teach with us and just do a workshop on that, the white space, because that in
Mhm,
itself, you know, I just think we fill up rooms with sound. We don't appreciate the silence. We fill up pages with
mhm,
words. We don't make space or allow space to just exist and fill up organically. So like just the way that you express it just is so wise and resonant. So I appreciate I could talk to you for a very long time, but
mhm.
I want you to tell the folks how to get your book and direct them to where you if you have a special place you'd like for them to purchase your book and where they can find you on social media.
Yeah, so you can find me under Kiki Petrosino on Facebook, Twitter, as long as it exists, and Instagram. And if you want to order any of my books, I have 4 books of poetry and Bright, the memoir. You can go to sarabandebooks.org, or you can go to your favorite independent bookstore in your town.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Kiki. I hope that we can stay connected. I appreciate you being part of the Hurston Wright family. You know, what we didn't mention is that in addition to being one of our former instructors, you also are one of our Legacy Award honorees. And you're an award-winning writer from many different places, but we just are so grateful to have you part of the Hurston Wright family. So thank you for talking
Thank
with
you
me
so much. It's my honor.
today. All right, take
Bye,
care.
Yuka.
Bye bye.